Let's talk about, in this video, 2nd and 3rd John. In a previous video, we talked about all of 1st John in the 3 literary sections, and what we'll do here is pick up 2nd and 3rd John, which is part of a collection, a 3-letter collection that John wrote to establish churches in the faith. So let's pick up 2nd and 3rd John, which are the 4th section, or the 4th session rather, of the Mastering the Scriptures booklet. And then the 5th session is about the implications, the convictions, and a final challenge about John's 3-book collection. So let's pick up 2nd and 3rd John. So if you have not listened to or followed the video on 1st John, I highly recommend that you go listen to that first and then come into this section of 2nd and 3rd John. So, 2nd and 3rd John, in this session, session 4, we pick up in the beginning an introduction, very much the same as the others, reviewing Peter's circle of letters, the Johannine overview of all the letters of John, reminding us that John wrote to establish churches. We review the intention statement for all 3 books. And then we remind each other that John's thought is more circular, and then he uses a constant circling, coming at it from a variety of angles. So, 2nd and 3rd John were very likely part of the package of letters with 1st John. 3rd John really is a recommendation for Gaius, and that's really the author Luke Timothy Johnson has really said this quote here, just a phenomenal quote, that 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John were really a collection of letters expected to be read together. So in 2nd John 1 through 6, you see the elder is likely is John here. The elect lady is likely a network cluster of churches, and the children are the individual households, the individual house churches, rather. So we don't know that for sure. But that's our best estimation of what John is doing here. He's the elder. The elect lady is that network or a cluster of churches, and the individual children he refers to are the house churches. So 4 times he states in the first 6 verses that we are to walk in the truth, which also means walking in this love he talks about in 1 John. And thus, in order to walk in love, and in order to love each other, you must walk in John's teachings. That's becoming very clear. John has authority and in his teachings, and he's expecting his recipients to walk in his teachings. 2 John 7 through 11, he says, as you walk in this truth, follow the didache, the teachings of Christ. Don't go beyond those teachings, and don't give hospitality even to those who go beyond those teachings, because they're giving you something that's beyond our teachings, and that's not the didache of Christ, and they're going to upset the entire church ultimately with their false teachings. In 3rd John, his concern is that the churches, again, are walking in this truth. And Gaius is likely an elder who's responsible for overseeing part of this network of churches. John writes to, in the churches that you see in Revelation 2 and 3. There's about 7 churches there, and he's writing to establish that network of churches. And so Gaius here is very similar to the work that Titus did in setting up elders in every city in Crete for the network of churches throughout Crete. So that's how we need to see Gaius. Not like Titus in that sense, because Gaius is an elder of a cluster of churches, where Titus is an apostolic co-worker setting up elders in the cluster of churches. So John's team of leaders, he really refers to them as friends and brothers, co-workers. So Gaius had some authority in receiving and sending co-workers, and Gaius had some ongoing communications with John through these co-workers. So Gaius is playing a very important role with John, part of John's apostolic team perhaps, an elder in the network of churches. He can play both a local role and very much an outward-focused role in the network of establishing the churches. In verses 9 through 15, he talks about Diotrephes, and he says, Diotrephes does not recognize our authority. And this is a real problem. He doesn't recognize the co-workers in the network. He spreads false rumors. He goes beyond the apostolic teaching, our teaching, and he's not testified by others. Diotrephes is not in the teachings. Demetrius, on the other hand, John testifies about him. He's spoken of favorably, and he's used throughout the church network. And so you can see in this letter, there's very much an apostolic co-worker in Demetrius, and there is Diotrephes, who is out of step, out of line, and not part of this work. And so in 2 John, verses 12 and 13, and then in 3 John 13 through 15, that both letters end with John saying to them, I desire to be face to face with all of you, in a greeting of all the co-workers. And that's how both of them end. So the 2nd and 3rd John, how John integrates them, is 2 John, he says, don't let false teachers get into your house. Don't welcome them. Don't go beyond the teachings that I've already given to you. And that really integrates into 1 John, that second literary section. He says, do not follow those who have left or undermining apostolic authority. 3 John is discern leaders in your midst who go beyond those apostolic teachings by separating you from the apostolic leaders who stand in the truth. And this is integrated to 1 John, the third literary section, which is test the spirits of those teaching you, since there's many false prophets. This is true still in our churches today, that people undermine the leaders, undermine the teachings, as long as they are standing on the teachings of Paul, Peter, and John, and standing on those truths, and not standing on secondary or third traditions, but rather on those truths, then other people are spreading rumors or are going beyond the teachings of the original apostles. And just that's what John is warning about in his letters to these churches. So let's look at session 5. We again do some review for you. A little bit different in this review because we review the 10 basic teachings from 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. We do, again, review the intention of John and the intention of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. And we do review the New Covenant Living summary out of 1 John, that first literary section. Review the basics of New Covenant Living from the second literary section, from the third literary section. And we review the basic ideas from 2nd and 3rd John. So now as we summarize the implications of John's 3-letter collection, let's look at those. John is really claiming apostolic authority in 3rd John. This is implied really now throughout this whole 3-letter collection. John has apostolic authority. He's saying who to listen to, who not to listen to, who's in step, who's out of step with the teachings. And all 3 of these letters draw very centrally on the upper room discourse, which is John 13 through 17. Very much, if you read those chapters where John is with his disciples in the Last Supper, and then read 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, it makes so much more sense of how he's actualizing it, he's implementing it, he's explaining more in these 3-letter package. Walking in the truth, walking according to his 3-letter package is how you walk in the truth. And these letters are directed at the churches in Revelation 2 and 3 in order to establish them in the faith. John saw these as authoritative traditions to be passed down to all the churches, which means we need to pass these down to all the generations of churches. So some convictions here and then a final challenge. We need to, as churches, as church leaders, we need to help all of our people master the 3 canonical sections of the New Testament and really do so primarily in the order of which they were written. And we need to do all of this. Now, there's so many questions to address underneath that, but let's leave it there for now. And we need to do all that establishing within the context of establishing our own churches, not as an academic study, not as an individual Bible study, but in the context of being embedded and matured in a new covenant way of living. Wow, so powerful. We need to grasp the framework of the canonical sections first, and then here's where I'm explaining a little bit more about understanding how to establish your people in the 3 canonical sections and in all of John's literature. The author's intent then of the letter, so you start big with the whole framework. Then you come down to the purpose of the letter. Then you come down to how is the letter naturally structured, its design, and then in each of its structure, its literary sections, each of the chunks, what are some of the core teachings in each of those chunks? And that should result in that you're able to follow the Spirit, which enlightened the original authors to write them, have a purpose and have them in those chunks, those literary sections, and the core themes within each of those sections. You're following the exact way that the Spirit enlightened the apostles, which will give you a complex network acumen. You will be enlightened by the Spirit as He enlightened the original apostles. And the actions of us as leaders is, first, we will now be able to provide ongoing assessment to the churches and identify gaps. As we develop a network, a complex mind, complex network acumen, we can see gaps. We can assess those gaps, and then we provide corrections to those gaps through our teachings, through our writings, and through personal visits from ourselves or from our team. Very simple stuff, and yet so powerful in what He's given to us. The final challenge is make a long-term commitment to mastering these collections of letters. It will have amazing results. And the final, as we close here, the final challenge for us is, can you really discern between paradigms aligning to Jesus' full teachings and His apostles? Then you're able to discern secondary traditions from primary traditions. That is, what's primary in the New Testament, what's primary to the apostles, what are the apostles trying to do with these letters to establish churches in loving one another and following a new covenant way of living versus coming around for religious events. We should be able to discern the difference in a set of patterns in the apostles' original teachings. So to that end, let's do it. Amen.